And we are live.
Okay. Right. Good evening, everyone. We are welcome to the Police Accountability Board meeting for January 7th, 2021. We are going to get started right away because we do have a full agenda tonight. So the first thing we're going to do is, we've welcomed all of you. We are not going to be approving any minutes today, but we will approve both of our minutes from the last meeting and from today's meeting at the next meeting coming up. One of the things I did want to get started with is the update on the governor's executive order. So I was wondering if Connor could give us any updates since the last meeting and any new details.
Will do.
Thank you.
I'm going to share my screen, go into this little presentation thing. Got a new presentation format for all you folks who are PowerPoint nerds. So this presentation is going to run through a few things on the agenda. There's a piece on the working group. There's a piece on our meeting with Councilmember Gruber. And then there's a piece it's not formally on the agenda, though I've spoken to most of you about it, which is a discussion about oversight hearings. So let's start with the working group on police reform. Okay, so here's what we've done since we last met. We've given a number of presentations to organizations and individuals on the recommendations and findings that were released at the end of last year. It's been wonderful. We've had dozens and dozens and dozens of people have a clearer understanding of exactly what we're proposing. In those presentations, we've gotten a great deal of feedback, which has been really, really useful. And I just want to thank Shades of Sisterhood, the Police Accountability Board Alliance in particular, for hosting us for some of those meetings. We've received a great deal of feedback via phone and email, almost all of which I followed up on except for today's batch of feedback. I just want to really thank the folks who left detailed voice messages and detailed emails, some people going line by line through the recommendations. I can't say how useful that's been, whether it's correcting errors that may seem smaller, ideas that may seem small, to big picture things like whether or not these recommendations are remotely close to the right thing. It's so useful. Everything matters, and I just encourage people to continue emailing pab@cityofrochester.gov with your feedback on our answers, which are on our website. PAB, I'll put the website up at the end of this. We've gotten a great deal of media coverage everywhere from the Minority Reporter, Democrat and Chronicle, Rochester City newspaper, and a lot of TV news coverage of the release of our answers and the need to get feedback on them. I'm very happy with that. And again, thank you to all the reporters who took the time to speak with us to get the word out. And finally, informing elected officials. We've reached out to all city council members asking to see if they want presentations, if they have questions, if they and their constituents have feedback to give. We've gotten great response from a bunch of folks, and we will be continuing to do that, do those one-on-ones in the coming week. So I want to talk briefly about something that also happened, which was United Christian Leadership Ministries released their recommendations. Now, UCLM chose not to release a formal set of answers like we did. Instead, in part because the PAB's answers were so comprehensive, UCLM chose to simply release a set of 5 recommendations about what should be in this reform plan that comes out of this working group process. I'm going to send around the most recent draft that I have of those recommendations so folks can sit with them and read through them. But I'm just going to briefly summarize what they are right now. And then next week, I'm hoping to get into the details more. But just right now, just a top line on this. Probably the central recommendation they're making is for a community-controlled officer review panel to have non-police folks involved in the first stage of the hiring process, asking a specified list of questions to candidates to make sure that they are the right kind of folks for service. The specific recommendation from UCLM is to have UCLM itself serve as the organization doing the candidate interviewing. But I think the general idea is community-controlled officer interview panel. The second is anti-racist officer education. This kind of dovetails with one of our own recommendations, making sure that throughout an officer's career, from the academy all the way till their retirement, they are receiving anti-racist education that speaks about things like white supremacy, how it affects officers, how it affects our community, how it affects law enforcement in general. The third recommendation is for more de-escalation training. It's for a really expanded amount of de-escalation training, essentially the equivalent amount of de-escalation training compared to the amount of training on use of force. So for every hour trained about how to use weapons, protest response things that are, harmful or lethal, there's another hour on de-escalation for officers. There's a new body-worn camera program that they'd like to implement, tweaking what we already have. And then there's a recommendation for a comprehensive pre-arrest diversion training to make sure that officers can approach situations in ways in which, putting someone in a cop car and putting them in jail is not necessarily the first response. And so those are the kind of 5 big ones. I want to particularly call out Frank Starpoli for a lot of great communication with PAB on this. Obviously, Reverend Stewart and all the other folks with UCLM for putting this out this week. I hope we all get a chance to read through these recommendations and see, where, if and how PAB can either sign on to some of these things or the ideas driving them. So that's it mostly on the UCLM recommendations. I want to talk about next steps, specifically for what's coming next for the PAB. So on Tuesday, that's excuse me, not 11/12, that's January 12th, we're hoping to have a public forum. Tomorrow morning, I should have the American Sign Language interpretation set up, confirmed. When I do, I'm going to release a press release stating that we're holding a Zoom webinar for folks to come to. The framework will be this. It's going to be essentially the same presentation that Chair Wilson, Vice Chair McIntosh, Rabbi Settle have been giving this last week. It's a PowerPoint presentation where I run it. I run the slides. Board members talk about our recommendations and our findings and ask for feedback. The hope is that we can use Zoom's Q&A function as well as Zoom's chat box function to get questions from folks, answer some of those questions, and then gather feedback right there in the forum. The only quirk right now is that it appears that we're capped at 500 people because of the city's Zoom license. I still think that it would be a wonderful thing if we had more than 500 people. But the hope is that we will also be releasing a recording of this, and if folks who can't make the webinar want to hear more, we will have a YouTube presentation people can watch. That's one thing. The second thing is that we're having a Spanish language presentation. Thanks so much to Ida Perez for being willing to sit with me tomorrow and record a version of the presentation that we've been giving in Spanish. I've gotten a script out that's been translated. I've got slides that have been translated. I've got a press release that's been translated too. And so the hope is that folks who are in the Spanish-speaking community in Rochester also have a chance to learn what our recommendations are and hear them. And I just want to emphasize to anyone watching, we do have translation services. So if folks are sending in feedback through our email or on our hotline, that will be translated. So we encourage folks to leave feedback in the language of your preference. We're going to have some more one-on-ones. As I said, city council members have requested one-on-ones to learn more about our recommendations. I'll be giving those. I'm happy to, share those dates and times with folks if folks want to join to listen and hear what city council feedback may be. And then part of my job is making sure that all of the feedback that we're getting is assembled for 2 reasons. First, when we are revising our recommendations, making our final recommendations, we want to base that on the feedback we're getting from folks. But more importantly, or just as importantly, I'm assembling the feedback we're getting so that all of that feedback, even the recommendations that folks are hoping for us to do that we may not embrace, all of that gets to the working group so that all the community feedback, all the voices we've been hearing are heard by everyone involved in this process, from RPD to race to the mayor's office. So I want to step back and pull back to the timeline for the working group as a whole, because in last week's presentation or discussion with the working group, we got a little more certainty about how things are moving forward. And I just want to say these dates are tentative. They may change based on how other members of the working group approach their work. or how the mayor's office decides to do things. But this is the tentative framework that was put out in the meeting minutes last week. Oh, and my apologies, I got the sequence off. But here's how it's going. On the 14th, that's next Thursday. My hope is that we're going to all review and approve our final set of recommendations, and we can do that during hopefully next week's board meeting. The hope is that I will have very brief summaries of things out to people for the feedback, so people can have a few days to sit and digest with the feedback that we have received. And then on Thursday, really have a chance to, say, okay, these are the things that we want to add or revise. And then, of course, that vote will be an authorization for me to, put those recommendations into our final report and then do any of the additional tweaking that needs to happen there, so that on the 19th, we can submit our formal final recommendations to the working group. So around the 19th, there's going to be a 2 to 4 hour retreat of some kind for the working group members to get together to reconcile things and to come up with some kind of draft reform plan. Taking what the RPD is recommending, what we're recommending, what UCLM is recommending, what Race Commission is recommending, putting it into something that looks like a plan. And then on the 25th, now that's a Monday, January 25th, there would be that reform plan will be released to the public so that the public would get a chance to see what the working group as a whole is recommending. And that will be followed by an entire month of public comment. Now it's not clear what the city will do in terms of creating a public engagement process. I don't know if the city's planning on, hosting, forums. I don't know if how the city's planning on releasing the plan or making, conducting a survey on it. I just don't know. But hopefully at this coming week's meeting, which is on this Monday, we might get some answers on that. So that's the first part of the timeline. The second part is kind of ending that public comment period at the end of February. So all the public comments will be due by then. And then March 12th, there will be some kind of finalized report to council. So the assumption is that sometime between the end of the public comment period and that March 12th deadline, there'd be a process for the working group to come together and revise its reform plan based on what the public has said. And then by the end of March, there's the thinking that council will call a special session just to review this reform plan, debate it, and then either revise, adopt. I'm not sure how council, I can't speak to how council plans on approaching this, but on April 1st, council would approve of, or by April 1st, council would approve of some plan, and it will be released to the state as proof that Rochester has fulfilled the requirements of the executive order. And so that's really the end of the summary on the working group. I didn't know if folks had any questions about that process now before we move into other parts of my report.
I just have a question. Have you had any response from the RPD or race folks about our responses?
I'm supposed to have a meeting with a couple different RPD members, Moses Robinson, hopefully tomorrow, Nick Petiti, who's part of the working group, pretty soon. I'm looking forward to hearing that feedback. What I will say is that, one piece of feedback I got from an officer was saying how thorough our answers were and thanking us for spending the time getting in such detail. So that was one. That's the consistent piece of feedback that I've gotten from RPD folks already. I will say I forgot to bring this up, but at the last working group meeting, the mayor wanted to extend her thanks to all of you and all of us for taking the time to take this working group process as seriously as we did. She thanked us for submitting such comprehensive answers, and she recommended that all working group members read through the answers and see what the PAB was recommending and taking it seriously. So I think that's a great thing. And so, the feedback I've gotten from the working group members has been mostly positive. So but to respond to your question about institutional responses, I'm hoping to hear from Wayne Harris. I'm going to reach out to Wayne Harris again. Wayne has not, the Race Commission, Wayne Harris is the Race Commission's representative in all this. Race Commission has yet to release its recommendations on this yet. And RPD has yet to release its full recommendations to folks yet. So I'm still waiting to hear from RPD and Race on the big questions, as well as any formal response to our recommendations.
Connor, just a moment ago, you responded that you had received mostly positive comments from the other committee members. Does that mean that there were some comments that were not positive?
Yes, there was one comment that I wouldn't say it's necessarily positive or negative. The comment was this. The comment was that our use of $147 million or roughly $150 million to describe the police department's budget was not necessarily inaccurate, but may not have been fully nuanced. This is kind of a technical thing, but the way that the city currently presents its budget is that it breaks out lines for each department. And then there's a line for what's called undistributed expenses, which is mostly a line for, benefits, pensions, that kind of stuff, contribution to pensions. And, what a lot of other cities do is they take that line and break it out by department, by showing, well, here's how many benefits and pension requirements go to police officers, past and current. Here's how many go to the fire department. Here's how many go to PAB, et cetera. And so, when I reached out to the budget department, I asked them, I said, look, I'm looking for a full figure. How much do we actually spend on policing each year? And the figure I got back was $147 million. And so that's what we've been using and discussing. And so I know that in the past, there's been some talk about whether or not, you should use $150 million, if you should use, the line item $90 million figure. I think that, as I told the working group, I think, you could go either way, but I think that when folks want to know how much the city spends on policing and policing related things every year, you have to include benefits. You have to include benefits and pension contributions. It's the way to really say how much we're spending on this stuff. And so we had a back and forth about that during the working group. And so I think it was less criticism and more of, this is something that we should all be talking about in the future. I wasn't particularly, I think that we should continue to talk about the full budget figure, but Bob, that is the sole piece of criticism or quasi criticism that I heard.
So it was a pushback against transparency.
It was pushback against the use of certain figures.
Understood.
Any other questions on the working group process moving forward, anything like that?
I have a question. You may have addressed this already, Connor, but do you know when the RPD is going to be releasing did they discuss anything about when they're going to release their answers?
No, I don't know. I think it is a great thing that UCLM has released its answers publicly. I'm glad that we did. I believe that the Race Commission will be releasing all of its recommendations, including those related to policing, in February. I hope that they do so sooner too, though I don't know. I can't speak to how Race's process will work on that. I don't know if RPD will release its recommendations publicly. I just don't know. Any other questions? Anything about the feedback we've gotten or anything like that? Okay, then I will move into the second part of our discussion, which is about the meeting with Councilmember Gruber. Now, I'm happy to have, Chair Wilson was also there, Vice Chair McIntosh, I believe Bob was there. I think Rabbi Settle was also there. So I'm happy to defer to any other, comments or points on that. I'm just going to briefly summarize what that meeting was about. It was a meeting about the City Council's process moving forward with regards to submitting recommendations to the administration, to the mayor's office, about how to approach the Locust Club negotiations in this coming year. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna make sure I read all the cut off parts in case you can't read everything. City Council may submit feedback to the mayor's office in the next month or so. The timeline's a little fuzzy. It kind of depends on how, how quickly they can get feedback from amongst all of the city council members together. But sometime in the next month to maybe 3. The Police Accountability Board can submit feedback to council as a part of a package, to say that, PAB has given some thoughts to what the city should ask for during contract negotiations with the union. And that would go as a package to the administration. Councilmember Gruber also noted that we can conduct our own process. We can choose not to submit feedback through council, but instead we can submit feedback and recommendations to the city as a whole, or do whatever we want with this Locust Club process. Council's not asking us to do anything particular. They're just offering us a chance to participate in their own process on this moving forward. And I think understanding the timeline here is important. It's not clear when the city and the Locust Club are planning on sitting down and continuing negotiations. I've heard lots of different things, but the general consensus seems to be it's not going to be for quite a while. There's certainly not any sense that they're going to be sitting down in the coming weeks, maybe even let alone months. It may not be till maybe even next year on this stuff. So the fact of the matter is that there's not a ton of urgency here, unless folks would like to have recommendations brought to city council to be part of their process. And so, if the PAB wants to do that, then we're going to have to, start doing some research on, well, what should be done and all this. What I will say is that, organizations like the Police Accountability Board Alliance have come up with some recommendations to the city, or recommended changes that they hope people push for in the contract process. So there's already some thinking and work done on there about this already. The question is just, when do we want to kind of get involved in this process given the timeline? I don't know if other people who are at the meeting want to comment.
I think the one other thing I'd say just about timeline is that my understanding was that the city council doesn't think the city is, or I should say both the city council and the city think that they should wait until there's a decision about our role in discipline before we're negotiating the contract. That they don't seem, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that they don't want to negotiate that part of it without a court decision.
I think that impression is correct, Rabbi Sato.
Yeah, I don't.
So if there aren't any other questions on that, all I'll say is that, this doesn't have to be decided tonight. I think people should think about it. If folks think that there's an urgency to, submitting things to council and thinking that, there's a real benefit to having some kind of package set of recommendations to council, let me know and we can talk about it. My intuition is that we have quite a bit on our plate. And we have to just think carefully about where we put our energy in the coming weeks. And that kind of brings me to my next point. Oh, well, first I want to talk briefly about the Rules Committee. I know that we'd spoken about maybe approving a set of new operating rules tonight. I think it's probably best to maybe delay that, but maybe a week or so at least. I've gotten some great feedback from Bob, from Rabbi Settle, and from some other people. I think that, we don't lose a ton by waiting another couple of weeks to kind of work through this, make sure everyone has a chance to really sit with some of the big recommendations, the rules we're thinking about, like attendance rules and things like decorum, that kind of thing. So I think that, delaying a little bit might be useful here. And before I moved on to the next thing, I just didn't know if anyone had questions about that before moving forward.
No, I'm just glad you're going to give us a little more time, because I would like to go through it again one more time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so here's the one thing, and again, this wasn't on the agenda, but I think it's important to talk about it, is oversight hearings. And I just want to make clear what I'm talking about here. You know, a core power of ours is to review RPD policies, practices, and procedures, make them transparent, and then make recommendations about how to change them. Oversight hearings are one tool to achieve, to exercise that power. You know, you've all seen oversight hearings probably held by Congress, where you have a bunch of Congress people up in a row, kind of grilling people on some subject. That in general is what I'm talking about. So just keep that in mind as we think about this. This is a way to exercise our powers to review RPD policies, practices, and procedures. I want to talk first about a potential subject matter for oversight hearings, and it's protests. Protests in the way that the RPD responds to protests. Part of the reason I want to bring that up is because RPD gave a briefing to City Council last night about two things. They talked about how they manage and respond to evictions, but they also talked about their policies regarding protests and protest response, and how they organize and plan with regards to protests, and then how they use force in protests. During that briefing, RPD announced that they're revising their protest policies in light of all of the protests that happened last year, and new perspectives from the new command staff that's come on board with Chief Harriet Sullivan. I also want to just protests in law enforcement's role. It's out there because of what happened yesterday in the Capitol. What happened yesterday, I'm not going to belabor it, but what happened yesterday is, as much as anything, a law enforcement matter about the Capitol of the United States not being protected in the way that it should have. Today, the Sergeant at Arms for Congress resigned at the request of legislators, and the Speaker of the House asked for the resignation of the head of the Capitol Police. Talking about protests, it's not just, who protests are, who is protesting, but it's what law enforcement and how law enforcement may be over responding, but how law enforcement may under respond given who is involved in a protest. So I think what happened yesterday that really just, I think, upset a lot of us has a lot to do with law enforcement, and it has to do with what we do as an accountability organization. And finally, this came out in the briefing yesterday. The Rochester Police Department is preparing for, in the near term, public protests in Rochester. They said that, they public protests relating to criminal cases involving police officers. That was said in an open meeting yesterday. So RPD is preparing for this right now, which is why I'm suggesting that the Police Accountability Board maybe think about start doing something with regards to reviewing and recommending policies regarding protests. So here's my thoughts about how we might conduct oversight hearings regarding this.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Oh, of course.
Because I guess I'm just wondering. So they've decided, RPD has decided to revise its protest policies, like right in the midst of Wilmer Hale also stepping in and supposed to be doing some review of policies. So I guess I'm just not understanding that. If they're supposed to be reviewing the policies and they're changing it midway, I guess I'm just not clear on that whole process.
I'm not clear either, Dr. McIntosh. I'm not clear either. Which is part of the reason why I think that oversight hearings might be a useful tool to get answers to these questions.
And also, what would that mean for any recommendations that we might want to have?
It's a very pertinent question, because at yesterday's hearing, RPD was discussing how it uses flashbangs, how it's using pepper balls, how it's using these things. And from my understanding, RPD is not thinking about banning these things. RPD is instead choosing to heavily restrict things, including flashbangs. Councilmember Melendez specifically asked whether or not flashbangs would be banned. And and my recollection could be wrong, I rewatched the hearing today. The response was that flashbangs would be heavily restricted as opposed to banned. So, our recommendations regarding, which really focus a lot on RPD's use of protest-related devices, it's important to know if the RPD is already kind of choosing whether or not to, make or not make some of these changes that we're hoping for.
So I
have a
another
question.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Go
I'll
ahead.
yield the floor. Go ahead.
Did they give a time frame as to,
stop sharing.
okay, did they give a time frame as to how long a period of time that they'll take to review or, change some of the things?
Danielle, I don't remember. I don't. What I'll say is I don't recall a time frame. They may well have one, but what I do know is that they have already started formulating a lot of these changes. So they've already come up with I think a new 3-phase approach to how to respond to protests.
Okay.
But I don't know the level of invitation. What I do know is they're still having discussions about a lot of the details. So things have not been finalized yet. I don't know
Okay.
if they have a date. I don't know if they have a date to put the stamp of approval on this stuff.
Okay, I was just wondering because if we give our recommendations, will it be in the midst of, while they're doing it, or would it be after they have already finalized their changes, and will they be willing to still kind of negotiate, after the fact
Right,
that they've already made changes?
right.
I'm also wondering if we'll get a copy of all the changes that they would like to make or see made, and where they stand now, and then so we can take time to review everything, give everything, and just go line by line like they would in an oversight hearing. Is that correct? I'm not.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, part of
Mike,
go ahead,
you
Bob.
said they made a presentation to council.
Yes.
Who did the presentation?
It was Chief Harriet Sullivan, the executive deputy, Andre Anderson, and I believe Nick Battiti was also there. So it was 3 folks. There may have been another 2 people, but the presentation was primarily Andre and the chief.
So could we ask them to come to our next meeting
So
and do the similar presentation?
Bob, I have a that gets to my framework for maybe how to approach this.
I'm sorry, but before you do that, I want to say I don't think we have much choice. If the RPD is already making changes, we better get in there and critique it. We can't just leave them, if you would, unopposed.
And I guess my other question, is this in response to the terrorism it's being called on the news? Is this based on what happened yesterday at the Capitol, or is this based on something that they have been in the process of? And will they have it done by, before in February, essentially? Will this be done for the April deadline?
I don't know. I know the answer to the first question, which is they've been working on this since Chief Harriet Sullivan came in.
Okay.
She has been, trying to do some kind of reform on this for a while. So it was not instigated by what happened yesterday.
Right, because I would worry if, because I would definitely, additional to what everyone is saying here, want to see what those changes are, because, to see if they're harsher than they've been. I would like to see that process.
Yep.
So also, I guess I would like us to set up some assumption also with the RPD. If part of our job is to review policies and procedures, if they are reviewing specific policies and procedures, they should be in touch with us about that, right? Because otherwise you're setting up duplications of effort, right? So if they're looking at protest policies, right, and then they change them without informing us, they're still going to have to look at what we have to say when we come and review them, right? So it doesn't seem, it doesn't seem productive, and B, it also isn't acknowledging our role here with what they're supposed to be doing. So I think that we have to set up some kind of agreement with them about how, going forward, about how we communicate when they are looking at specific policies or procedures.
And it's not transparent if they're changing it
right
in the
without
process.
us knowing. Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing I would say too is that my concern is, I think, that the difference between how Black Lives Matter protesters were handled by DC police and how seditious, violent protesters yesterday were handled, right, has to do not with policy and procedure, but with culture. And that if there isn't some way of addressing that in what we're talking about, then you can, write the policies till the cows come home, but nothing's gonna change.
I'm not,
My,
I would extend that just a little bit in saying that protocol does play a role.
If it's standardized, if it's standardized and everyone is treated the same based on that protocol, but when that protocol is not standardized and one group is treated one way and another group is treated a different way, then that protocol is kind of null and void.
Agree.
my other concern with them doing this now and us having to come back and give some other recommendation is that we know when that happens, then everything gets delayed, right? So now there's another gap of time, because if we don't intervene now and they are able to process something and put it in place and start training or whatever, then now, right, that's not automatically going to stop and go back and whatever. Now it delays the process, and then it's going to go back to the old way that they used to do things. So that would be my concern as well, because I've seen that happen when things are implemented. Somebody else comes up with other ideas, and then it takes a very long time to look at both and then decide what's going to be.
In addition to that, the focus is really supposed to be on the work that we're doing for the reform, but they have not submitted all their documents because now they're working on this policy and procedure. As you stated, that same delay.
I have another question for you guys. I wonder if we're going to do oversight, and we should. I'm all in favor of it. I'm enthusiastic about it. I was just thinking, Connor, about the people that you mentioned that did the presentation, the chief and a couple of high ranking. I think there should be a sergeant included in there.
Agree. I also wonder too, folks, I know that we're supposed to have an RPD liaison. And I just wanted to ask, maybe we can follow up on that after this meeting or send some emails out, but I think we should have a liaison to RPD.
We have a legal obligation to have one. We don't have a choice. And I will say is that I've been looking at some officers who I would like to request to be a liaison. I'm having some conversation. I'm not going to say any names, but I'm having some conversations this week just to listen to officers. And I would like to submit some names to you folks to see what you think about that, because I think it's important to do it sooner rather than later. So a couple points I just wanted to say about the timing of this. I don't want to put words in folks' mouth, but from watching the hearing and my understanding of some things, I think that the RPD is under quite a bit of pressure to conduct some internal revisions to its protest policies before the next protest happens. And so I think that is kind of their timeline on this, is to revise and do things as quickly as possible. I'm not justifying that or anything like that. I'm just saying I think that may be their process here. If anyone has any other questions at this moment, I just want to go back to my proposal for maybe a framework for moving forward. So let me just share my screen again. Okay, so here's my thought about format. And the way you could do this is gather questions from all of you. You've all been thinking about the protests in Rochester, protest policy, policing for a while. Inviting the RPD and command staff to a public hearing, submitting some questions in advance and asking for written answers that will be released to the public and us. And then at the actual live hearing, having board members and staff ask questions. and have that, last as long as it needs to. Unfortunately for city council, often these hearings with RPD, they only have a couple hours. They have a lot of things to go to. So questions and answers lasts 20 minutes, 25 minutes. We need a lot of time to have questions asked. But part of the reason that's important to understand here is that hearing would just be the first step, just the first step. We could have other hearings, information requests, et cetera, to do the kind of things that I think, Bob, you were talking about, having line level people, sergeants come talk, because I guarantee you, whatever that first hearing is going to be, it's not going to be satisfactory, because there's going to be a lot more questions raised. There's going to be a lot of gaps. And so, a true oversight process is never just one hearing. It is multiple hearings, multiple requests for information. And the advantage to starting now, rather than trying to, come up with everything, get it together, because, you could imagine you're not just going to have, asking the command staff or RPD officers. We could ask, local criminologists, people who are experts on, police policies regarding protests, to come testify and give their opinion on what the RPD is planning to do. You could have, folks who've been part of these protests, talk about what they've experienced. You could go quite a ways with it, but I do think that maybe the most pressing thing is getting the leadership to come give a similar presentation to the one that they gave to council, and have us get to ask some big picture questions that can kind of get some things on the record and allow us to move forward with some more knowledge. So, please.
One thing I think it was Shani who mentioned, they have documentation for this stuff. So the number one step would be to ask them to provide us with their relevant documentation, so that by the time we start talking, we've at least had something to read.
Yes. And Bob, my hope is that first part, gathering questions from board members, I would hope that would be, what's the word? What would come before it is information out to all of you. So you would have some things to read through and some things to ponder. The other thing I want to bring up, and I meant to mention this in the last section, is, the RPD is coming up with some, thinking about a lot of things. For example, the current plan is to not have officers wear their name tags or to have their officer IDs out there during protests. The idea is to have some kind of separate numbering system so that the public would not be able to know directly who officers were, but the RPD would be able to. And I'll say, frankly, that got some serious pushback from City Council last night. But that is part, again, there's a lot of things that RPD is considering here, a lot of things.
Yeah.
So will those? I'm sorry.
I'll yield.
So will those numbers be on them? Like, they may not have their badge or their names, but whatever numbers they're assigned to will be on them.
I believe that's the proposal, Ida. I believe that's the proposal, but I'd like to. I didn't get all the details I was hoping for about that.
Just because I know that we did that once with the Puerto Rican festival, we had all of the security guards, which were mostly police officers off duty, working as security guards. We had numbers for them, so it helped people identify them better, because they had a number, was visible, whatever. And so if a patron had a complaint on a security guard during the festival, they just gave a number, and then based on the number, we knew who that person was. So it could work if the numbers are visible, they're big enough, that if someone has an encounter with an officer during that time, they can easily identify them by their number.
And if we had access to the numbers.
Right.
So what does it say about community police relations?
That was, and I just, I would encourage folks, if you have time, the presentation is up on YouTube. I will say, council members like Councilmember Patterson asked some piercing questions on this stuff. And I think you would be interested to hear some of those things.
I agree. I will watch it when I have time, but this just seems like another effort to not be transparent, period. It just seems that there's another just as we get a little bit closer to progress, let's move the needle again. Let's change something. Let's change it, because we know a lot of things go back to policies and procedures and legislation, and let's move the needle. Let's, if this is how they're responding, let's do this. Let's change these policies before they do this. So my question, the current policy that exists, have they removed that from the website? Are we going to have that to refer back to when they make these said changes? So it's just like all these things are in question now. I have to go on their website to see the policies that they're changing so we can have a comparison when we're looking at things. Because like I said, are those going to be taken down? Are we not going to have a reference to look at? Are we not going to know what changed? It's just another layer of not being transparent.
And I'll just follow up on that, Dr. McIntosh. Something that I found frustrating is that the RPD, since Chief Harriet Sullivan has come on, has revised a number of its policies. And the only reason I found out is because I do a fairly regular reread of what's on the open data portal. And I saw that there was new things and the old ones were gone. And so I had to do a manual kind of comparison to see what the changes were, because they aren't.
That's my point.
There's no press releases about it. There's no, and that I don't think that's a particularly good operating procedure. And what I will say is that, I have a meeting scheduled with the chief. We just got this scheduled in the last, I think, 48 hours. We're having a meeting in about 2 weeks. I'd like to extend an invitation to any board member who would like to be at that meeting. It's in the middle of the day. I believe Chair Wilson is able to attend. But I'm going to bring some of this stuff up because I just don't think that and I wasn't notified of the presentation to City Council. I think that we need to know when the RPD is going to be giving presentations, when they're changing policies on an instantaneous basis.
So I think one of the first things I would like to see after this meeting then is we need to figure out who is our liaison at RPD. We should have a liaison or liaisons so that when we have specific questions, we can reach one or two people that can give us the answers that we need, especially or people that who would we reach out to at RPD when we have a question? The only person that you and I have interacted with or that we know is the chief, right? So we need to make sure that we can have an assigned person. So we need to actually utilize that. So let's figure out who those people are and make sure that we have open communication with them about changes, anything that happens. Because Connor, to your point about the city council meeting, you didn't know that was happening. Who would you have asked? Who would you know to talk to about that stuff? So we need to make sure that we're getting on top of that as soon as we can.
We also need,
I would just like, sorry, go ahead. Sorry,
a notification protocol. I mean, we need something in place that says that, the RPD always notifies us when they're looking to change policy or procedure.
And I'll just say that it's not an uncommon thing. Other police accountability boards across the country sign MOUs with their police departments to do all sorts of things.
Okay. I just want to raise something that is based on. I served in the Navy for a couple of years, and everybody thinks that the captain runs the ship, but it's not the captain that runs the ship. It's the chief petty officer, and the chief petty officer equivalent on the police force is the sergeant. So a part of the liaison, it seems to me, if you really want to get something, get the nitty gritty, you're going to need an experienced sergeant, not the deputy chief or associate chief or any of that.
I'll also say, Bob, some of the most productive conversations I've had have been with former RPD officers, particularly officers of color and women, who have been able to give really remarkable insights into how the thing actually works. And I think it's a top priority that all of this board hears from those people, either in public or in private, because the things that I've been hearing, you should be hearing as well.
You just reminded me, has anybody talked recently to Cedric Alexander?
I have not talked to the former.
Not in a while.
Okay. Might think about that.
Yep. So I'm just gonna hop back. Let me hop back to sharing my screen with all of you. Sorry for going on mute. So here's really just kind of wrap up here. My hope is just for next steps I'd like us hopefully tonight to approve this general idea of moving forward with these oversight hearings on protests. And then also to think about the timeline, when people would like to hold a hearing. Because I know one of our last sections in this meeting is going to be talking about meeting schedule moving forward. And then, if assuming we approve to move forward with this, I would create a framework for moving forward, kind of a detailed plan, something straightforward, but also, gives us some concrete understanding of what's next. And then hopefully next week, folks would vote to approve that framework and we could really kick this thing together. So that's really my thoughts on these oversight hearings. Okay.
Bob raised a fist, so I think Bob is in favor. So we can actually stop and take a vote. Is that what's wrong?
You need the motion?
Yes, I do.
I so move.
Second.
Alrighty. So a motion on the floor is to approve a general idea of an oversight hearing with the Rochester Police Department. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, and that is Arlene?
Aye.
Okay.
Mhm.
Right, so that motion is carried forward. Okay. Great.
I believe that is the end of my section of the agenda, Chair Wilson.
Okay, thank you. So now, folks, really, this is just some meeting reminders, things that are going on. So Connor already mentioned our meeting on Tuesday, which is a public meeting. We really would like to have as many of you as possible be there to be able to answer questions from community members. So that would be great. So I'm going to follow up to make sure that we have a strong showing from us at this meeting. The next thing I wanted to talk about is we have an upcoming meeting that is requested to be scheduled by City Council all of us are invited to this meeting. So it is Tuesday the 26th at 5:00. And so I did send a request to all of you. So just please make sure that you follow up on that as soon as possible. They are waiting for approval. Okay. And I did want to just ask a quick question. That I know that the final answers deadline is on the 19th, but I know that we're going to be continuously getting requests for presentations. And so does that mean, is this something we should talk about? When is the final time we can give presentations? So let's just discuss that real quick.
Well, we will next week be, kind of hopefully approving what our final set of recommendations are going to look like. So at least at this phase, presentations on our draft set of answers and, what recommendations and revisions we're going to make, that should wrap up probably by next Thursday. But what we've been saying consistently is there's going to be a whole month-long public comment period on the plan itself. And I want to say it's the responsibility to do public engagement about that is on the city's shoulders. That's on the city's shoulders. Now we can figure out if and how we want to get the word out, participate, but that's on the city. But what I'm telling folks is if you don't have a chance to comment now, if you can still send the PAB in feedback. We always want to hear your thoughts on this stuff, and we can always transmit that feedback to the working group and push for the recommendations we think are right. So that's my answer on that, Chair Wilson.
Alrighty, thank you. And I also wanted to talk about a rules committee meeting, like setting up a meeting just to discuss our rules and making sure that we are all in agreement with the rules so that we can adopt those and get those working for us. So that will be, folks, what I'm asking for is your availability for the rest of the month, because we need to get these done. I'm also asking for availability for another board retreat. And I'd actually like to do that every month or for the next couple of months. So also please keep in mind that we will need to know about availability for that as well. So if you can send me as much of your availability as you can, that'd be great.
I would say my availability is going to be Thursday.
Hold on, please. Dr. McIntosh, please go ahead.
I'm going to say Thursdays is my availability.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there any reason we can't just schedule those for Thursdays?
Not at all. I just think because the month is getting so packed with things, I just wanted to make sure that I had, if Thursdays is everybody's availability, that's fine with me. And you all know that. I think though that if there's an alternative time, I think that should be included as well.
I have a little bit of alternative time, but it would only be until the 19th.
Okay.
So that's not a lot of time. Because then I go back to teaching in the evenings the other days of the week. So
I have openings on Wednesdays and Thursdays. I do have some time on Fridays, but it would be after 3 p.m. And I can always, email you or text you this information as
Yep. So just everybody email me your availability, and I'll make sure that I have it in a document that's set aside. And the last thing I wanted to make sure that we wanted to talk about our meetings for the rest of the month, and if we should be, and what does that look like for us? We wanted to discuss upcoming meetings and planning, which is kind of, what we're talking about right now. And if we should be meeting once a week still, or once every other week, just based on all the stuff that we have happening. So just wanted to open that up for comment and questions.
So if we have some of this other work that we need to do, and you're talking about, can it be 1 week for this work and then another week for the meeting? So instead of meeting like this every week, we can, one would be this, and then the next one would be some of the other work that we need to do. Since Thursday seems to be the best day for everybody because we've already committed to this time.
So that sounds good to me. Anybody else have a comment?
Matthew looks
Just
like
propose, given the urgency of the events of yesterday, of the possibility of protests in the near future, and how that's our main way that we can both serve our constituents and also make us, work on a real issue that's an imminent, I think, threat to people. We should devote every hour we have to this and make it happen. So if it means getting it, and if Connor can show us that doesn't need to be every week, we can go with that. But I think we should plan to go every week so we can get some of this stuff done, or at least plan to do as much as we possibly can to get this rolling. Obviously, it depends on RPD and their willingness to respond, but I think it should be priority alpha along with, we have plenty of stuff to do, so we can always meet and keep working on this stuff.
I agree with that.
Connor, can I ask, what was your sense of the timing for how soon we would have the first hearing with the police?
It was as quickly as folks could get ready. The what determines it is getting the police, would have some sense of when they could meet. I think that a request from us, I think that they should be willing to meet on our time frame. What it is how long is it going to take for us to prepare for that hearing? I have some tentative calls with congressional oversight people to make sure that we can adopt some best practices in our own. I would like to also, create, materials for all of you so that you could review and start, generating your own questions. I'd want to construct a framework. So what I'm saying is it's going to be at least 2 weeks.
Okay, so could I make a recommendation then? That our meeting next Friday, the 15th, deal with rules. We have a regular meeting the 22nd. We have our second sort of retreat the 29th, and we aim for the 5th of February as our first oversight hearing.
What meeting on Friday?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong dates. Excuse me.
I know.
Excuse me. I'm looking at my calendar. I'm looking at the wrong dates. The 14th, I'm sorry. Next week, the 14th, we do rules. The 21st, we have a regular meeting. The 28th, we retreat. And the 4th of February, we have our first oversight hearing.
I thought we had something specific on the 14th.
I think we do. We have to review and approve the final answers. So, I mean, that won't take up the entire meeting, but it might. So I just want to make sure that we're making room for that.
How about we split it? We do that and then do the rules.
Or we do some of the rules if there's time, and we move them to the next week if we have to.
Yeah. And I know that we have a specific time frame. I know that, we are all kind of functioning in a lot of the top of our limits here. So I would, if we don't have to, I would really rather not extend the time, but I know we have in the past. So that's just another thought as well.
Is it possible that if we have something, say like a meeting with the chief, and one or two of us can't make it schedule wise, those meetings are zoomed and recorded, so the person who's missed the meeting can make it up by watching the recording, right?
There's no reason why it shouldn't be they shouldn't come to us during our meeting time, A. And B, I feel like it's really important for all of us to be participating in something like that.
I'm not sure I understand. Bob, do you mean, or sorry, Board Member Harrison, Dr. Harrison? Sorry, all the like all the other things. Are you talking about a meeting with the chief of police, or are you talking about?
Well, I'm just talking about it as a general practice, that if we need to have a meeting, and one of us or two of us can't do it because of the schedule, we can always stay informed by watching the recording of the meeting. Now, I agree with Jor that that's not the same as being there, but it's a compromise.
Of course. Yeah.
And Bob, is the idea that if that's the case, then we could hold meetings not on Thursdays? We could pack more in?
Because saying that we're not going to do our first oversight until February, just kind of, I realize that's just next month, but what we want to do is to be ahead of the game here. We don't want something to happen and a protest springs up tomorrow.
I wonder if we can, well, first of all, Connor, can I just ask how realistic is it to really have an oversight hearing this month, with just considering everything that we have going on? So I just wanted to ask that question first.
Well, I think that next week we are booked with this recommendation stuff. It's just clear that we're doing that. I think past next week, once we kind of push these answers off there, we still have to get together to do the reconciliation process. That's going to be some time preparing for that. But I think that we could have something by month's end. I think we just have to make clear that that's what our priority is, and that's what we're committing to, is doing this now. You would have to clear the table of other things.
So we can switch our retreat and the first oversight hearing. Maybe we can do, I would just submit to the group, maybe we can do that on the 28th, and then we can have the retreat on the 4th. I don't know how that feels.
Yeah, but wasn't the purpose of the retreat kind of last time to kind of go over the rules, some of the rules at the end? We talked about the operational or something. So there's other parts to it, correct? So when are we going to do those parts?
So
I'm fine with whatever the group wants to do, but I don't want to rush the process and not have the process down just because, period. So
that's fair. I think the thing too is, though, to Dr. McIntosh's point, that if we're gonna, I know we're taking half of, well, on the 14th, we're doing half of the PAB reviews and approves our answers, and then half the rules. So that means that we will have to put in another meeting where we're addressing the rules, or another time. So that's another thing as well.
Okay, so I guess my other concern about, I'll say rushing, it's not necessarily what it means, but having that sense of urgency about our first oversight hearing is, I feel like I want to be really well prepared. I want to ask good questions. I want to know best practices. I want to be able to, so I also feel like I want to give us enough time to make sure that we have that ability to prepare. So as much as there might be a sense of urgency about all of it, and the truth is, regardless, I mean, if we, even if we had the hearing on the 28th and there was a protest on the 27th, it wouldn't have changed. What we said on the 20th wasn't going to change what the police were going to do on the 27th anyway. And it's not going to change what they're going to do on the 4th of February either. It's going to be a longer process. So I think that we can, take a breath.
But at the same time, if there's awareness of oversight happening on these issues and there is a protest, I wonder if just that would mitigate some of the practices, knowing that there's some public scrutiny, that this is something that's under investigation, if you will, or under hearing. So again, not that we can determine any of that stuff. We don't have any of that control, but I could see at least having something on the schedule and making sure it's well publicized so that everyone is aware it's happening and that it's coming, so that everyone's on their best behavior at these protests. Because again, knowing that there's something happening and that it's going to happen and there's a date and that there's a plan, I think does a lot for the public, regardless of whether it happens or not. So I think at the very least, getting that date down would be great, and then being committed to making it happen ASAP.
I'd also add that whoa, what did I do?
Not you. I think it was someone else.
The oversight is probably the closest thing to our job that we've talked about.
Silence. Yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
I think Bob is enthusiastic about this.
Bob is enthusiastic. He can't wait for this. Okay, so that I just want to make sure that I'm kind of steering this talk into a kind of a decision here. So when do we want to do these oversight hearings? When do we think we want it done? Do you want it done on the 4th? Or do you want it done on the 28th? Because I really agree that I think that, the 14th and the 22nd, I think that we'll need more time. And I want to also be prepared. I echo all the sentiment as well.
I also think we can't assume that the first date we give them, the RPD is going to say, oh yeah, we'll come. I think we probably have to give them a couple dates.
As an aside to something that just occurred to me is, even if there's a protest before you have the first hearing, I think part of what we do, Connor, we can talk more about this, is to assign folks who will go and observe and make sure that there's plenty of documentation of real practices in real time and not just espoused practices. And so again, knowing that that's coming and that people are observing is important. And I just think making sure that we don't just say we're there, but we really show up and make sure we work with folks both all around the spectrum to make sure that it's well documented, which we can use at some point. Be helpful.
We're not even going to know what your best behavior, but we don't even know what they're going to be doing, what things are going to be changed. There's so many moving parts here. We don't know, what are we looking for? I mean, I get what you're saying, Reverend Nikoloff, but everything's changing right in this whole process. So we don't even know what we're even looking for, because they're going to be changing everything along the way. So, I mean, I'm fine with whatever the group decides. I would like to be prepared as well. So I'm leaning more towards the 4th. And if we could move it up to the 28th, I'm fine with that as well. But I just feel like we still need to know more about what parts of the process they're changing in this time.
I think the 4th is probably.
Oh, hold on. Board Member Brown, go ahead.
Okay. I think the 4th is probably more realistic for all the things that we want to do, the things that we have to look at and formulate how we're going to move forward. The 28th is pushing it a little bit. And if something comes up, yes, Reverend Nikoloff, I do believe some of us ought to be there to document, but nothing that we put in place between now and the 4th is going to affect anything that happens. So my recommendation would be for the 4th. I know that also we're going to be working on the rules and all of that kind of stuff. And because we've read them, we've gone over them, there may not be a whole lot of changes. That possibly should not go more than the meeting that we have recommended. But preparing for the overview, preparing so that even when people approach us and ask us about some of the things that we're doing, we need to have a way to address that, to let them know that we're viable.
100% agree with both Board Member Brown and Dr. McIntosh, and just saying, like, even if let's do this the best way possible. Let's make sure we're prepared. Let's make it well worth the people's time. And if in the meantime stuff goes down, let's also use that as an opportunity to observe and make sure it's publicly known that we're observing, so that we can also we can do all of the above, I think. But that's a good point. I mean, obviously things are going to happen the way they happen, especially in the thick of these kinds of things. But yeah, we can do all of it, I think.
So can we agree upon a date?
Yes, and hold on, I just wanted to ask before we moved on, Board Member Tucker, you had something to say as well.
Board Member Brown, those were my same exact sentiments. I would rather the latter date, the 4th, for those same exact reasons that were already mentioned.
Okay, does anybody have, anybody else? I agree with the 4th as well. I think that would give us enough time and to make sure that this is done properly. Does anyone else have anything to say about a date that they do?
The only thing would be if for some reason they, I don't know how responsive the RPD is going to be. So we could also have the alternative date of the 11th, just.
Okay. So, so I guess do I need to call a vote or ask for a vote on this, or can we agree that we're going to go with the 4th? I did want to add to Rabbi Settle's point that, if we're going to have an alternative date, we should, have an alternative date of possibly the 11th. But again, that might also look different. I think that we should see what they come back with as well. That also might change, but knowing that we have to do this very quickly. So
I would just make a caveat that if either the executive director, the chair, and other members of the board feel that it's vital to the work that we do additional preparation for the sake of it being excellent, then we have some sort of way to do that. I think, as people have said, doing this right is really important. And if the executive director believes we can get that done by the 4th, I'll go with it. If the 11th seems like a more realistic view, I'm also open to hearing about what we think we can actually do to the best of our ability. And maybe we can't make that decision right this second without Connor making those conversations first, but
right.
we got to do it well. This is like one of our first public acts, and it's a really important, what happened yesterday, it's a really important issue, and we got to make sure that doesn't happen anymore, either what happened over the summer or yesterday in DC here in Rochester.
Okay. So I guess I'm gonna, should I ask for a vote, or are we all in a general agreement?
Either way you take it, we will respond. Either way.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Doctor. Okay, so I guess I'll ask for a vote then, since we'll have a general agreement. So the vote is that we are going to have our first oversight hearing on February 4th with the alternative date, a possible alternative date of February 11th, 2021. So I'll take a motion there, and I'll look for a second as well, please.
I'll move it.
I second.
Everybody. Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, so all in favor of the motion, please say aye or raise your hand so I can see you. Thank you. Okay, so that motion carries as well. Okay, so we have those dates, the 4th with the alternative possible date of the 11th. Okay.
And will we be releasing some sort of press release or announcement that this is on the docket in response to what happened yesterday in particular? Just, I think it's a great context in order to make sure that people see the PAB is working. People are very afraid, and people were very worried about that. And I think just knowing that something's happening is really important to tell the public.
Do you think that we should wait until we have a confirmation from RPD? And I wanted to Reverend Nikoloff's point. I just want to again be clear. Next week we're going to be doing approval of the final recommendations, and I'll just say I expect there to be a handful of substantive changes and some smaller ones, but it's not going to be as comprehensive as the first round was. So the 14th would be approving and reviewing some of the rules, maybe all the rules. The 21st is a flex date. We're not entirely sure what's on that. If that's the case, then the 28th may be a fantastic time to have prep. Devote a whole night to prep. And then we go into the 4th or the 11th strong. So I just, Stephanie, I hope you don't mind. You are you are the lawyer in the room. Is there any questions or comments you have about what's going on?
Regarding the oversight hearing specifically, since this evening is the first time I'd heard of it, I think I would just like to talk to you offline to get a better idea of what you were envisioning, just to ensure that, everything is on the straight and narrow, so to speak.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
I also wanted to hold on to Dr. McIntosh's point, though. We had said that we were going to do a retreat on the 28th. And so if we do prep plus retreat, we need to make sure that we're, being mindful of folks' time and that we're planning accordingly for both.
But I think we can defer the retreat if we're going to be focused on the prep.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that
to be specific, I think we can say that if the hearing is going to be on the 11th, we can go along with the retreat on the 28th and prep on the 4th. If the hearing's on the 4th, we prep on the 28th and retreat on the 11th.
Yeah, I mean, so basically we'll just be flexible with what we have. That sounds fine.
And I just wanted to clear, the oversight hearings is something that we had planned to do before. This is not necessarily in response to the incident from yesterday, correct?
That's
just to make sure that's on the record.
Yeah.
The question has always been, what is the first investigation oversight hearing process going to involve? And I think now we've decided it's going to be on protest response.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. All right, so we have about 10 minutes left. So we do have one other issue to address. However, I'm wondering if we should wait until the next meeting, since it's really not of vital importance, and discuss some more of logistics regarding like oversight hearing issues and anything else that comes up that we need to address before the tonight ends.
I thought Connor was going to talk to us about hiring, in which case I assumed we were going to go to executive session for that.
So we are. That's what I'm saying. We have 10 minutes left.
Okay.
So that's what I'm trying to ask. So
I
we have
see.
10 minutes left, right? So we can either defer that. Hold on. We can defer that to the next meeting, or we can talk about it for the last 10 minutes. So just wanted to talk about it now.
Sure. Can be brief.
Okay, to be brief. Okay. So we are going to, the purpose of executive session is to discuss some hiring of personnel. And so I am asking for that motion as well.
And just so we're clear, it's hiring personnel for these 2 open chief positions, as well as the search, the continuing search for independent counsel.
Okay, motion. Okay.
I make a motion that we move into executive session.
And then Dr. Harvey seconded that motion. So all in favor of moving to executive session to discuss what the executive director mentions, okay? Reverend Nikoloff and Reverend Harvey, you are in agreement? It's not, okay, thank you.